Hello and welcome. You are listening to Moodally Matters, the podcast that recognizes that your mood matters. Every episode, we talk to a range of amazing guests with experience in some of the top organizations in the world, discussing work life at the crossroads of mood, well-being, and performance. Together, we aim to create better workplaces, one mood at a time. Let's get started with your host, Moodally founder, Erika First.
Hello and welcome. I am Erika First, your host of Moodally Matters. Today on the show, we have a very special guest, Alexandra Nuth, the co-founder of Control, the financial management tool for freelancers and flexible workers. Alex has a rich background in finance, having worked at Accenture and ATB in Canada. And today she shares with us the absolute bottom line changing effect that providing performance coaching can have, especially in financial services. On to the episode.
Okay, so Alex, thank you so much for being here with me today.
No problem at all. Excited.
Let's get started by, why don't you tell us a little bit about your professional journey and how you got to where you are today?
Perfect. So I'm a Canadian, but born and raised in Western Canada, and started my career. I was lucky enough right out of university, my undergrad, to jump into consulting. So I joined one of the big consulting firms, did my tour of duty in that, traveling all around the world, got to see a lot of really cool places and kind of live that crazy lifestyle that you get to do in consulting. Did that for a number of years and then decided that I wasn't so crazy about the last minute changes to my schedule that came with that career path. And so decided to jump into industry and joined a regional bank within Canada for a number of years and had a lot of progressive roles in leadership there. So went from kind of in their innovation group all the way through to running major projects for the organization, board endorsed projects. Did that. And then right before COVID, actually left my corporate role and went into entrepreneurship. So now I'm running a Fintech company that's focused on providing financial solutions for freelancers and independent workers in the US. But still have a lot of ties into that whole banking corporate world, but have kind of made a few transitions and a few career moves over the last few years.
Okay. And what are some of the primary stressors that you come across in the financial industry?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. I find the financial industry in particular, it's a little bit more old school. So especially in a lot of the areas that I work in around innovation and technology and trying to progress new ways of doing things, there's a lot of kind of unwritten rules and kind of structures that are really hard to learn and then try to break. And I find that's one of the hardest things in that industry is that it's just, we've always done it this way, or we can't reinvent things, or we can't try to do things differently, or even promote people that are different. And I can get into that and ran into a lot of that when I was hiring people. And it was just around really a challenge of breaking the status quo. It would be the biggest challenge I found within the financial industry for sure.
And so you mentioned in terms of hiring, you are obviously a woman in financial services. So just with that, was your experience different as a female than maybe some of your other male colleagues?
I think in some ways I was really lucky that I had a lot of really great sponsors when I was in the financial industry and even still. So I was lucky. I think that I had a more traditional background that a lot of them understood. So coming from consulting, having an MBA, having all the check boxes behind my name, I think it made it really easy for them to understand and put me kind of in a box in a sense to say, we understand who you are and how you think, and you're a little bit lower risk, if that makes sense, in terms of how they would look at me. And so I was able to kind of move into a lot of leadership roles and have that sponsorship quite early on in my career. But I did see that a lot of women that were on my teams or that were my peers didn't always get that same benefit because they didn't necessarily have whatever those check boxes were that a lot of those males in leadership were looking for. So that became a bit of a struggle for me, was as I was trying to promote other women within my teams and within my organizations, was how do you give them the room and the space to have their voices heard when they don't fit into these nice little boxes that the industry expects. But I did have some really great experiences personally, and found that it didn't affect my gender, didn't affect me in a huge way, but it did affect the women around me.
And so so it's interesting that you say, there's like a list of qualifications or expectations in order to fit into a box. A lot of banks communicate that they're innovative or at the forefront of, the market. And I think that's what you would want, a forward-thinking bank. So how do those two reconcile each other?
Yeah. The one thing I found, and it's probably what inspired my journey into entrepreneurship at this point, was that a lot of it is a lot of talk. So it's really, really hard to actually do it. And I got to meet a lot of, because my bank was mid-sized, so around 60 billion in assets under management. So really small for Canada, but middle-sized for the US. And I got to meet a lot of other banks that were kind of in that size. And it's sort of like, we'll take the risk and we'll do something interesting, or we'll support people, or we'll do these innovations if it fits within what we're comfortable with, within our risk tolerances, whether that's around people or around projects. There was still kind of this, it needed to check a few boxes before it was really going to be executed. It wasn't like this pure innovation, this pure startup, this pure, let's break a fundamental assumption within our business. It was really around, let's try out this technology here, or try out this person there in these low risk environments. And hopefully there's a whole bunch of other banks that have done this before. I found that was usually one of the requirements too, was, has anyone else done this? And if someone had somewhere, then it gave that confidence for the institutions to try something. But if there wasn't sort of a precedent that existed, then typically they wouldn't be the first to do it. So innovation within reason, if that makes sense, is kind of what I found from working in the industry.
Very protected innovation.
Yes.
Which I suppose makes sense, because you certainly don't want to be taking wild risks with other people's money,
Exactly. Yeah, there's a good reason behind it.
Right. But so within these organizations, and you said, that there was like some challenges of people not having the same backgrounds, and that maybe being an obstacle in their growth. Do institutions like this tend to provide services to help bring up their people?
Mm-hmm. I was really lucky. The institution I was with was quite innovative on that front. So the kind of history of the company had gone through a bit of a crisis mode where it was almost sold for parts, was not doing very well, had a new CEO brought in who was quite visionary. And then he brought in a really strong chief people officer. And that organization ended up investing a lot into culture, and actually ended up trying to borrow a lot from non-industry standards. So there were some banks that we went and looked at, but a lot of times we were talking to the Zapposes or the Airbnbs to try to understand how they were developing their people or how they were creating cultures. And so I found that was the best kind of approach that they took to try to get unique talent in the door that wouldn't typically consider working at an institution like that, or something that was a little bit more old school. And then with that came a lot of leadership development, because we did realize that in order to keep people and to try to get people performing at a different level than what the institution had been experiencing, you had to really support people in a meaningful way. So there was an internal coaching organization that was part of the company for more senior leaders. There was external coaching that was available. There was a lot of leadership development throughout different levels. So a lot of different programs and initiatives that were meant to really kind of help people grow, as well as something that they called experiential bursts. So the ability for high performers to actually go do time in other departments and learn from other groups. So there was a lot of kind of focus on trying to help people grow and trying to identify leadership talent early and then help them move into these roles and kind of groom them for that.
Did you observe personally or even objectively in others that this had a benefit on how, on the business results, but also on the morale in the organization?
Yeah. So the organization I work for was, they had gone from pretty much one of the worst turnover rates in the region to being voted second best place to work in Canada in a period of about 5 years.
Incredible.
So that was pretty huge.
Yeah.
And went from we were kind of like scrounging for talent to every role we posted, we were getting thousands of applications. So everywhere I went, people were like, "Oh, wow, you work there? How can I get in?" So it became a bit of a cult following, which was huge. So we were able to be really picky with talent. And our churn rates we got to the point where our churn was so low that we actually had to ask whether that was okay. Because we had so little movement of our people. And we were like, is that actually a good thing that people want to be here this long? And are we getting stagnated from that? And
right.
So we were able to really turn around the numbers in a meaningful way. And so from a business result standpoint, we had people that honestly were getting paid below market and were still staying because they just loved working there, loved the culture and loved the opportunities that it afforded them. So it was amazing the type of talent we could get and the morale that we could have from that. We did have a leadership change after that. And it was actually interesting to see how a lot of those metrics reversed and how now the organization who isn't investing in those things anymore has actually taken kind of this golden goose and lost it in a sense.
So there's a very clear impact due to very specific behaviors that were installed, which is it's not always often that you see the immediate turnaround, but it's so interesting that you had like the before, during, and the after that really tells a solid story on that. And did you use any of the coaching that was available to you?
Mm-hmm. I was very lucky, again, just being in sort of a senior leadership role and running one of the major projects. So I got a lot of coaching during that period, which was awesome. So there was a lot of support that if you just put your hand up and said, I'm struggling with something, that they would go and find those people for you or let you find the resources to support whatever you're dealing with. But I had sort of two coaching experiences within the organization. Because of my level and because of the complexity of the politics that I was operating at, I ended up going with external coaching as opposed to our internal coaching team members, just because they're a little bit too close and knew a little bit too much. And so the external view was a little bit better. I had one that was more of a tactical coach, I'd say. So it was very much focused, someone that had come from industry that knew kind of the intricacies of politics within institutions and banks, and was able to help me sort of come up with plans around stakeholder engagement and team engagement and communication and things like that were really tactically focused on how to build leadership within the organization and progress the goals I was working towards. But probably the more interesting one I had was actually a corporate psychology group. And so we did this for every single person that was more or less known by the board, was kind of the threshold. And the board actually got the results from a lot of these assessments. And so what you would do is go through a big IQ assessment, go through a huge personality assessment, like a 3 to 4 hour corporate psychology interview that talked about how your childhood impacts who you are as a leader and all of that. And then they put together a report on who you are as a leader, share that with the board, share that with your boss, which in my case is the CEO, and then potentially with some of your peers as well. And there's also 360 feedback portion to it as well. And to put all that together into an action plan. And then there was weekly or biweekly, depending on what you needed, coaching to that action plan to help you improve your leadership skills. So that was probably the most valuable one I had, because it didn't take a very isolated approach on work. In terms of the coaching, it was much more around who you are as a person and your feelings and your saboteurs and all these sorts of things that happen and how that can help you become a better leader.
Yes. Well, I mean, it seems a no-brainer, but yet who we are as people is obviously how we show up within the organization. If we don't understand one, you can't separate the two. It's not like you become a different human being when you walk through the door. So do you watch Billions?
I do.
Okay. This is just like a my fun question. How close is Wendy Rhodes' character similar to some of the coaches that you might find in real life?
It's funny. In some ways very, in some ways not. Like, I think that's how Hollywood always does everything. She's definitely like very aggressive. So I wouldn't say any of my coaches were that aggressive in calling me out on anything.
Right.
And I do think she's got a little bit more opinion that gets brought in. And I think that's the Hollywood kind of side of it, that she has to kind of have an opinion and kind of be pushing. But in another way, in some ways, I'm very similar, like the dedicated time, the ability for them to see something in you that you don't see. And I think that's the biggest benefit. And what I always find really funny when watching it is like the blind spots that she calls out of like, this is why you're doing this thing, or this is a reaction you're having because of this, and just kind of brings it to the surface for you to process.
Yeah.
That is extremely accurate. So I always benefited from that and had a lot of that kind of blind spot identification of like, hey, you're doing this thing. And they knew me well enough to know why I was doing something and then call it out for me. So not completely. And she's got really good style. I don't think any of my coaches were quite that stylish.
Sorry. No offense.
Not everyone can afford like the Gucci dresses.
And it's interesting because you mentioned that actually you found more use in the external ones, because obviously they have the ability to be a little bit more objective and maybe not as much as we would like to. Our opinions are still conditioned by the knowledge that we have and what we've experienced. So perhaps some of those internal coaches were going to steer you more to something that lived in their comfort zone as opposed to what was right for you or, going on for you as a person.
I totally agree. And then bringing in external views from other people can happen. And sometimes that's important, but there's also, sometimes that's not very useful either. If someone's getting too much input from other people that might not have the full story or all the context, especially at those senior leadership levels.
Yeah. I have a big question mark on the 360s, because I think that they're very useful, but as with anything, you have to, see where the source of the information. It's like, did they have one experience? Was it isolated? Was it great or was it terrible? So I don't know. I like, and I don't like, I'm not 100% sure, because it's so important who you pick to, and you can have people who have axes to grind and who use that as their moment. So it's a tool that I think needs to be analyzed by someone who is very good at reading that and saying, hold on, I know these two had like an issue, or I know these two love each other. So
yeah, exactly. There's a lot of context in it that needs to be brought in.
It's not good raw data. It's highly contextual data. Did you find that there were people who were not excited about having access to coaching, who did not want to use it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Definitely. I think it's a vulnerability that you have to kind of be okay with. And especially when the one that came with a bit more assessments, it wasn't like you could just jump into it and have a conversation. And I think some people are like, oh, I'll just go for like a coffee with this coach and whatever. It's like kind of like therapy, I'll just show up and I don't need to do the work. But when some of them required more work, I think that people sometimes were a bit more hesitant, especially 360s and IQ tests like that. And some of like the big like psychological analysis, I think those scared people a little bit. It's funny. I've always recommended coaching to my team members. And the excuses are interesting, and I'm not sure how many are valid or not, but a lot of times people say, I can't find a good coach, or I don't know where to find somebody, or I don't have the time, or whatever the excuses are. And again, I think it's probably similar to therapy around, you kind of have to have that willingness to know that you're going to be self-aware and be super vulnerable through this process. And if you're not, you're going to find all the reasons not to do it. And I think, and those people I think know exactly what their blind spots are. So they're probably the ones that would benefit from it. And they're just kind of choosing to ignore it. And I've heard too, this is just who I am, and I don't need to change it because it's what makes me strong. It's my kind of double-edged sword in a sense, but at the same time, that's kind of a naive view, I think. And so you hear all the excuses around it.
Was there like a profile in particular that was less interested in it? Like younger, older?
A lot of my team was pretty young, which actually surprised me. And actually maybe younger people are a little bit more resistant in my experience. Because there's kind of this like shield around I'm still learning, or I want to be who I am. Whereas I think when you're older, you've kind of been, you've kind of failed a few times. So you learn that you're not super invincible and that you need a little bit of help along the way.
And that failure is not a bad thing.
Exactly. And you just need to figure out how to learn from it and rally around it. But yeah, I think it's more just kind of an attitude-based thing. Like people that have growth mindsets, that are curious, that, seek out feedback, that are reflective and analytical, tend to be more receptive to it. And the people that I think make decisions more from their gut, and are just kind of letting life happen to them and are a bit less planful, seem to be the ones that don't. And so they just kind of think, it'll all work out and they don't need to take an active role in it. So it's kind of that fixed mindset, growth mindset thing that I've kind of noticed a little bit more is kind of the delineation between it.
And it's interesting that it tends younger, because I think maybe like instinctively we would say that that's not the case, but I do think I think it depends, obviously, because if I had to think about who I would imagine to be more reticent to the idea, somebody who's obviously very fixed in their mind, like I can't be changed, or I don't need to be changed. It's gotten me this far, so it can't be wrong. Which I'll be honest was a mindset that I had when I was very young in business. I was like, well, I'm obviously doing something right because I'm here, right? And we're doing this and we're successful. So why would why fix something that's not broken? And I too, when I was younger, was a little like, do I need this? And of course, there's the psychology of all this information being laid bare to other people that it's going to be discussed with your senior managers. It's going to be discussed with an executive team. That's incredibly difficult psychologically. But as I grew older, I realized, once the ego cracks a little bit, you're like, there's plenty I can learn from it. And hey, you know what? I've learned so much in these last few years that I didn't think I needed to learn. And now I know that there's more that I can. So definitely value there. And do you think, you've already kind of answered this, but I'll just formalize it. Do you think that this is a tool that should be offered in all financial institutions, or do you think that you guys had a very specific case history?
No, yeah, I think it's definitely something and beyond financial institutions is everywhere. And I think it's just an important piece of the puzzle to get another viewpoint on things. And I think too, bosses are a weird one. Sometimes you get a great one that can coach you through this and is going to help you grow. And I've had great bosses that did that and were effectively coaches. But the majority of bosses aren't. And so when you put someone's development and growth potential solely in the hands of a boss that's got lots of other motivations, I think that you're potentially hurting that talent. Because you're not giving them that objective or tool set to really help them to become the best that they can be. So I'm a huge proponent of it. And it's interesting, like there's a lot of kind of new apps are trying to like democratize coaching or make it cheaper, or make it more accessible to younger generations and things like that. And I think it's all super interesting, but I also think that finding the right coach is important, because it's coaching is almost, in some ways, there's so many coaches out there. Like I get a lot of LinkedIn messages that are like, hey, I'm a coach, like I can help you with your life. But I think picking the right coaches, like in a financial institution context, that understands the politics of how those institutions work and can dive into those organizations, I think is really important. A little bit of external context to say I've seen lots of financial institutions, but also the context to say I've seen other financial institutions and I can help you in yours, I think is really critical. So I think good coaches are important, but I do think it's something that should be offered. I just don't think it should be something that's cheaped out on, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's really interesting what you say about the relying on the boss, because I do think we have this tendency to say, oh, well, the boss will turn them into leaders, but very infrequently has the boss actually received any type of training as to how to manage other people. It's one of the things that I've always found astonishing is we put people in charge of other human beings with absolutely no training or coaching on how to communicate, how, what the steps of conflict resolution are, how to motivate your people. And sometimes you get people who learn it going forward, which obviously there's growing pains in that. And you can have your team suffer for the first few years and then they get better. But many people do not receive any form. And the boss decides the morale of that entire team.
And I find too, a lot of the leadership training, and even like I did my MBA, there's a lot of leadership stuff in there. It's all this like rose-colored glasses stuff around, if you just motivate your team and empower them, it'll all be fine. And they're going to be super motivated and everything will follow. But there's a lot of hard stuff in leadership that doesn't get written about. You can't Google it. You can't get a podcast on it. It's really challenging. So even leaders of leaders, like how do you deal when you don't like people, or when there are these hard conflicts, or when you have these big disagreements, or your ego is hurt, or you are dealing with stuff at home. And these aren't things you can just Google or read a book on. There's no books on them. Like I think in my MBA, there's one HBR article that we read that was like leadership warts and all. And so when I reference, but it's the only one that said that there's like negative things to leadership and let's address those and talk about them. And that was the only resource I have found that really talks about all the hard stuff about it, not just the upside or the positives or the rose-colored glasses views of it. So I think that's where coaching can really help, because you can be that honest side of it to say, this person's really annoying me today, but I still need to get them to perform. Why are they annoying me? Help me process this.
And that's, it seems silly, but there is, we do end up with people sometimes that we don't like on our team, and we're still responsible for bringing out the best in them. But as you say, we're usually responding to something, to a very specific trigger that they are bringing up that correlates to something else. And so if you can kind of identify it, you can work through it. You don't have to be best friends with everybody that you work with, but be able to like process it, as you say, enough to be able to deal with them, at least in an objective fashion. Mm-hmm. And it's also so interesting what you said. It's like, even the idea of the rose-colored glasses, like just go motivate your people. It's like every employee has a different motivation profile, and there may be one that's motivated by achievement. There's another one that's motivated by compliments. There's another one that's motivated by money, or, so each person has their own profile. And if you don't spend time and have those they are psychological skills in being able to identify based on their behaviors, because obviously if you ask somebody what motivates you, it's rare you're going to get someone who's like, well, I'm actually really motivated by compliments because I have this kind of profile, I'm a helper. So you have to be able to be in a position to do that. And in order to do that, someone has to have taught you that. So it either comes through an external coach or that you've been trained on your own. So do you think that, and I'm pretty sure I can predict the answer to this, companies that are leaders in this industry, as an incoming talent, do you expect to find this available to you once you get in the door?
It's interesting. In senior leadership roles right now, I would. But at junior levels, I wouldn't. I don't think that it's commonplace enough. And I think it's expensive. And so I think a lot of organizations don't prioritize it for certain levels. So I think it depends on the level. I wish it was more common because I think people get a lot out of it early in their career and actually can become better performers. But as a senior leader, I 100% would expect it for myself. And if it wasn't in an offer letter, I'd be asking for it. Right now, as an entrepreneur, I have to kind of find it in different ways. So forum groups and other peer mentorship groups and things like that, which I do, and invest in that myself. But in an organization, if I was ever jump back into corporate, that would be a requirement for me, is that I would have that support, definitely in any role I would take.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was looking at one of the professional groups that I belong to, talking about it was a search engine to help you find the right company. And, things like this, when I was just getting started in my career, did not exist, right? You didn't. You're like,
oh, I got a job, yay.
You didn't get to determine what kind of environment you wanted or what benefits you expected to see. Did they make me an offer? Is it more or less where I would like to be earning? You're like, yes, ready to trade in all my life energy to show up for that. And there was this incredibly long list of things, like what are your priorities? Like, I want to work from home. I want unlimited days. I want this, I want that. And so it's really interesting to see, especially with the new generations coming up, how picky talent is they have a different expectation of coming into the workplace. And they actually, different than obviously my generation, will stick to it. I have spoken to multiple people in Gen Z who completely left fields that they were very passionate about to go do something else because they found an environment that was more correct for them.
100%. Yeah, there was not even a conversation when I graduated. It was like the environments I worked in, especially in consulting, were awful.
Yeah,
they're just absolutely awful. But now, you can say, this is what I need to be successful. This is what I need to feel happy and fulfilled. And I think for some people that's very lifestyle oriented. For other people, like for me in leadership, it would be things like coaching. And I want to be set up for success and make sure that I'm able to do my job the best I can. And those are the things I would ask for. So I think it is changing, and talent's going to be a little bit more demanding going forward on this sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree. And it'll be interesting to see how it evolves, because I really think that it's only become a big thing since COVID, and then all of a sudden they were like, okay, well, we'll come back, but here's this long list of what I'm looking for now.
Exactly.
So to that end, I always like to close on 3 pieces of advice. What pieces of advice? I usually do it for young people. I'm going to flip it this time for you. What 3 pieces of advice would you give to an organization about putting themselves in the position to be attractive to talent?
For sure. Yeah, no, I think number 1 is the investment levels into talent. I think that's something that people are looking for a lot right now is, what am I getting? And are you actually invested in my growth? Because I think there's more of a reciprocal investment now. If you invest in me, I'll invest in you, versus the old school where we grew up, where it was like, okay, I'll just give you everything in life. So I think those kind of signals, like the signaling to say we're investing in you, and there's a little bit of that reciprocity that comes with that. The other one I'd say, I think being innovative in people and culture. So one of the big things that I noticed, again, with my past organization that worked so well, was just trying lots of unique things that like other companies, aspirational companies like Airbnb and Zappos have been trying. And we even made the switch as a financial institution from Microsoft Teams to Google G Suite and moved the whole organization onto that. And so things like that really signal that you're innovative, that you're open to change, that you're trying to improve the working environment. That's not just all about making money and revenue. And sometimes it is about improving the work experience day to day. And so I think things like that really matter too. And not just like the company did do this ping pong tables and stuff like that. Nobody uses those. But the things that matter, like Google and kind of fun things like that, or investments into new softwares like Slack and using that within a financial institution is really cool. And then third, and this might be a little bit of my Canadianness, and a bit on the D&I perspective, but I think too, unique ways for people to live. And I think this can be something true in the Great Resignation coming up. And it's around, do you have unique paternity leaves, parental leaves, maternity leaves, sabbaticals? There's a big pension fund in Canada that actually sends their people to a partner pension fund in Australia for a year. It is a swap. And so they get someone from Australia, they send one of their people, they get to like work in another country, in another pension organization, and then come back. So there's some really cool things I think that companies can do around structure of work, even if it's fractional roles and things like that, that I think are really going to matter going forward. So I think, and obviously there's the whole coaching aspect as well and the investment side, but I think being able to kind of understand their people and being able to create roles and structures that are tailor fit for people and that work around them, as opposed to just saying, I'm the company and everyone has to do it this way. So I think taking more of that self-reflective viewpoint on the organization would be the kind of general overarching advice.
And also provide, because now there are so many different people in the workplace. We can have older people, we can have younger people, different ethnicities, all, and as we said, each one of them has a different well-being profile and what they're going to need. So it
not everybody's just come to the office at 9, leave at 5, and then work another 20 hours of your spare time. Yeah. And some of my best talent were 3-day-a-weekers because they're moms and that's what they had to do. And they were fantastic and they worked more than 3 days and their output was amazing. And I would never have hired them if I had to have them full time. So being able to do that and then put coaching around it and all of that, you get these great diamonds in the rough that you're able to attract and keep.
That's amazing. Okay. Thank you so much for your time, Alex. It was great talking to you. I'm hearing all your wise insights.
No problem. It was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Moodally Matters. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll catch you in the next episode of Moodally Matters.